Vickery Studios in downtown Little Rock, this is Capitol View.
And good Sunday morning to you. Welcome into Capitol View. I'm Jay Burr. 3 Arkansan Republicans all vying for the governor's seat. And here to give us their hot takes on an already heated race is our good friends of the show, Bill Vickery. And looky who we brought back, Jessica DeLoach, the redheaded firecracker. Guys, I appreciate you guys coming on here. Let's kind of get to it here. So you guys may have heard of Sarah Huckabee Sanders jumping into the race now. I guess, what do we make of that, and what do we think of just the early messaging in what she's putting out there? And Bill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be back on TV with Jessica. Like I said, I feel like we're getting the band back together again. Listen, her announcement, which was widely anticipated, is sort of kind of par for the course. The bigger issue, more than her announcement video, is the fact that she's rumored to have raised all this money in a very short period of time, which I think a lot of people expected that as well. Look, this is something of a family fight amongst Republicans. You have a very strong candidate in the Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, a very strong candidate in the Attorney General Leslie Rutledge, and now a very strong candidate with Sarah Sanders and all that she brings to the table. And no doubt, her closeness to Trump is a big advantage for her. But when you look at this primary, that's just a little less than 13 months away now, or a little more than 13 months away, you're going to have about 300,000 people vote, and that would be a record for a Republican primary. That's sort of the estimate. That's not a lot of voters. It's very much an internal sort of face-to-face campaign, and I think that's what Arkansans are used to in their primaries, and this will be no different.
Yeah, and Jessica, switching over here to you. I mean, I guess, what do we think here so far of Sarah Huckabee Sanders jumping into the race? I know you've kind of got your opinions of her, but what does she bring to the table, especially kind of you being on the other side of things here? What do you think she brings to the table, at least differentiating from Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin and Attorney General Leslie Rutledge? Because those two, to me, Rutledge and Huckabee Sanders, kind of sort of play to that Trump crowd a little more than what Tim Griffin does. So how do you think things shake up, and how do you think they can sort of separate themselves out from each other?
Sure. Well, like Bill said, her entrance into this race was widely anticipated. We knew this was coming. Maybe we didn't know when, but we're here now. And I also, by the way, I don't think that this is the end, of seeing people enter this race or the GOP primary for governor. So for me and for a lot of Democrats, her presence in this race will be one of the first major tests that you see of Trump's brand post-presidency. She's one of the most senior members of his staff to, put themselves out there and say, I now want to lead in this capacity. It will be very interesting to see how whatever happens with former President Trump, especially with all of the talks of, impeachment, what's that going to do to his brand, and how will that trickle down onto her? It wasn't a surprise to see that he endorsed her. He made it clear when she left his administration that he was going to be supportive of her. So I did see a lot of commentary about, oh, why did Leslie Rutledge waste all of this time being so supportive of Trump when he turned around and endorsed Sarah Huckabee Sanders? That shouldn't have surprised anyone. There's just a closeness there that I don't think that Attorney General Rutledge could have achieved, just given the role she's in. So, I cannot help but think about the money that will be thrown around in this race, because you're not talking about nobodies. You're talking about the current lieutenant governor, who's a Karl Rove protege, who is a very seasoned politician, and no one should be discounting what he's capable of. Tim Griffin is a political machine. And I think that Attorney General Rutledge proved herself when she was first elected. She was a bit of an underdog, and now here she is. She's your Attorney General. She has significant fundraising capability. And then there's Sarah. And I think that they have a lot of overlap in their networks. So I'm expecting to see a lot of outside money come into play in this race. And this could be one of the most expensive gubernatorial campaigns that we've ever seen within a primary. So I'm actually very excited about it. That's more of the political science nerd in me, but everything Bill said, he's exactly right. the turnout in the primary, how this is going to mobilize voters, and then also seeing how Republican voters navigate something that is so family-esque, right? Everybody knows everybody, and it's going to get heated.
Well, go ahead, Bill. Let me jump in there.
No. I mean, I think everything she said is exactly spot on. The 527 money, the outside money that doesn't have to flow through a campaign, I think that's going to play a big role in the Republican primary. I think it will be the most expensive primary campaign for governor that we've ever seen. Could probably top general election prices in terms of money. So, but at the same time, it is a very intimate affair because it is a Republican primary. You're not going to have 5 and 10 and 12 million people voting. You're going to have 300,000, 280, maybe 301. So voters in the Republican primary are going to expect to see these guys. So a lot of retail politicking to go along with all the money spent.
Well, and too, Bill, let me get your take on this. What do we think of her messaging out the gate? Because she's caught a little bit of flack on social media this week for, you know, even Jim Hendren had even tweeted out, who's also rumored to potentially be in this thing.
Rumored to be yeah,
and it's like, you know, I've never had to fight a leftist mob or a radical media here in the state of Arkansas, you know, and he kind of lists off some of the issues that he's kind of helped deal with. I mean, what do we think of the messaging early on with this thing? Is it almost one of these things where it might be a national message more so than an Arkansas message?
Well, I think to some degree it was a message to raise money with. And I think it's very much an appeal to Trump voters. There's no doubt about that. She creates a narrative where you make a binary choice, with me or against me, or one or the other. And I think that's probably a smart move on her part. I did find it interesting that right off the bat, the Lieutenant Governor, Tim Griffin, fired right back about the video and said, you know, your idea on sanctuary cities would have been good in 2019, but we've already done something about that. And so I think that's how this race is going to play out. You're going to have folks say, you got to make this more about issues that are occurring in the state of Arkansas. She's going to want to speak more on a broader national narrative and things of that nature. And so that's that is a little bit of an under the hood peek to think what I think the messaging in the campaign is going to be about this coming winter and then early next year.
And quickly, Jessica, let me just kind of get your take on this as well. You know, just the messaging that's involved here, because like I said, a lot of people thinking, you know, like Bill mentioned, you know, a lot of these things are very Republican ideals. You're not going to find a lot of Republicans that necessarily disagree with those messages. But as he mentioned, you know, the sanctuary cities already kind of handled that, and just kind of the vague things of lowering taxes, things like that.
So her message, Sarah Sanders is going to be the person who overtly nationalizes this primary. I think that Lieutenant Governor Griffin and even AG Rutledge and pretty much anyone else who enters the race is going to want to make this campaign about Arkansas and Arkansas's issues, because that's the only way to have a clean, a fair, solid primary where Arkansas voters are going to feel heard. She's the one who I expect will taint the waters with a lot more of this overt nationalist messaging, which I think is distracting, but it proves it will create a challenge for both Griffin and Rutledge and anyone else in the race to find a way to break through that, because that messaging works in Arkansas for a reason. Sarah Sanders isn't just making this up. You noticed in her announcement, which was almost 8 minutes long, too long, she mentioned the presence of the liberal media, the far left liberal media in Arkansas, which does not exist. That is not a real thing. It's not a real problem. I can't, I'm a little stuck on who that person would be that would embody that. Maybe it's my Twitter feed. I mean, honestly, there's no far left media in Arkansas, but that's a message that plays nationally. And I think we're just going to continue seeing a lot of this. So the challenge really becomes, how does Griffin and how would Rutledge find a way to bring this race back to Arkansans and what matters most to them?
Yeah.
Absolutely here. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to branch things out here. We're going to nationalize the show, borrowing some phrasing there from our good friend Jessica here. So stick around with us here. We got much more with Bill Vickery and Jessica DeLoach coming up after a quick break. Y'all stay with us. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Replacing your old electrical panel? That's a don't do it yourself. Call Mr. Sparky instead to schedule your electrical panel replacement.
You don't have to put up with any malarkey. Call 888-8-SPARKY.
Success Vision has incredible prices.
I got 2 pairs of glasses in about an hour for only $39. I got my eye exam next door.
Success Vision has over 1,000 frames to choose from.
It's a one-stop shop for buying glasses.
12 years, and the service keeps getting better.
It's a 10 out of 10.
This is my 5th year with Success Vision, and I'm happier than ever.
2 pair for $39 in an hour for less. Come see us today, Success Vision Express.
Looking for your one-stop shop for all your boating essentials? Come to H2O Sports and Marine. From top brands and knowledgeable sales staff to quality parts and expert service, we're here to help you find exactly what you need. And now with locations in North Little Rock and Greers Ferry Lake, H2O Sports and Marine is here to get you out on the water in a boat you'll love with service you can trust.
Come to the Pratt Road Outdoor Flea Market this Saturday and Sunday, rain or shine. 3 pavilions of vendors selling clothing, household items, antiques, toys, and much more. Conveniently located right off I-530. So come see us this weekend at the Pratt Road Flea Market.
Come and enjoy a new experience in shopping for your home. At Aladdin Rugs and Home Decor, we have over 5,000 rugs in the latest colors and styles. Bring your pillows, your pillow shams, and sizes. We will help you select the perfect rug. We're #1 in customer service with 15,000 square feet of rugs, unique home decor, wallpaper, and flooring. Remember, buy today, take it home today, and save. Why wait?
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back to Capitol View. President Joe Biden has signed 40 executive orders and actions since taking office, and just hours after being sworn in, he took 17 executive actions. So just one of the many things that we can get to here with the very early presidency. Again, our good friends here, Bill Vickery and Jessica DeLoach. And Jessica, we'll start with you. What do we make of some of the actions that President Biden has taken here, at least in the very early stages? Because some of them, you kind of look at it one way or the other. A lot of it is what he calls undoing of Trump things. He has been sort of criticized for making those comments of, like, you can't rule under executive orders, but here we are, executive order after executive order. So I guess kind of what do you think here in the early goings, especially with some of the decisions?
Sure. So it is not uncommon for a president or a person to be elected to the presidency and then, start governing through executive orders. It's not what everyone would prefer, but it's what happens. Trump did it, and Democrats were outraged when he did it. And now that Biden's doing it, Republicans are outraged that he's doing it. And it's just a mud fight. It's the dumbest mud fight, because nothing that Joe Biden is doing should be a surprise to anyone if you were listening to what he was saying on the campaign trail. This is literally just him keeping promises, no differently than how Trump did the same thing when he began his presidency. So, a lot of the stuff that you'll hear about is, rolling back the ban on trans individuals from being able to serve in the military, right? That was a campaign trail promise, and that's exactly what we're seeing having happen now. But at some point, the admin pivots, the dust settles, and people start governing. And I do think that there's going to be some push and pull in the Senate because the margins are so close. The Democrats are lucky to have the House right now, but nothing is guaranteed 2 years from now. So people have to find ways to work together. And then they also have to be realistic about what do the next round of elections look like? Are we going to keep these majorities? If we don't think we're going to, then we need to start running really hard to get as much of this agenda done as we can, because we may not have this opportunity later down the road. Yeah, absolutely. Here, and Bill, kind of chime in here too as well. I know some things maybe not necessarily directly affecting Arkansas, but I know one thing: the Keystone Pipeline affecting jobs, not just nationwide, but a lot of them here in Arkansas as well. And then even got the some of the climate change. There we go. The climate change stuff, the rejoining WHO, jumping in the Paris climate. A lot of these things are kind of polarizing here. What do you think, just in the early go, of some of the decisions when it comes to that? Yeah.
Well, to Jessica's point, I mean, shocker of shockers, hypocrisy in politics. Trump went into office, used the executive order. He was critical of President Obama for using executive orders, and of course he did it. Biden's critical of Trump for using executive orders, and of course he does it well within. And to some degree, given the sort of gridlock nature of government in Washington, that's about the only thing that gets done these days. I do think there are some big issues. You talk about the poor Keystone Pipeline has been kicked back and forth for such a long time now. that no one puts a lot of faith in it. So it was on, it was off, and it's back on again. Now it's back off. Difficult to have any kind of stability from a business climate there. Rejoining the World Health Organization, going back into the Paris Climate Accord, all of those have foreign policy implications, and in my opinion, true policy implications for people in the United States that are negative. But look, presidents have used executive orders since time began. I mean, that's just, and then you know what? They do it right off the bat, and a lot of it's symbolic stuff. To Jessica's point, Trump said things on the campaign trail that he immediately put into policy through executive order. Biden said things on the campaign trail that he immediately put into policy. It is a way to show that you are keeping the promises that you make on the campaign trail, and you do it early because you draw attention to it and you say, see, I said it, now I'm doing it, and establish a kind of credibility like that.
And I guess, what do we think of the impeachment going forward? Because I guess you could kind of look at this from two different points of view. One being, the guy's gone. Is there really a need to go through with the process, especially when there's so many other things that need to get done in the country? But then also, too, you can understand, hey, you got to have your day in court sort of thing. I mean, what do you think about that, Bill, quickly?
Well, quickly, look, it was a mistake the first time that it happened. It's a mistake the second time that it happened. They don't think through to the second verse. It's the white-hot nature of the far left that really runs Nancy Pelosi. She bollocks it up the first time. She bollocks it up the second time. The Senate's going to have a trial. Somebody asked me immediately after the January 6th riots, was this the end of the Republican Party? And I said no, because the National Democratic Party is going to overreach and everything's going to come back. And I think a trial gives the president the opportunity to come front and center and say, see, I didn't do anything wrong. And Republicans then back him. And then so, I believe it was a mistake, especially happening now inside the first 5 weeks of the Biden administration.
And Jessica, kind of your take on that, sort of from the other side of the coin here.
So it is a very complicated matter, because ultimately what you don't want the American people being left feeling is that there was no accountability for what occurred that day. There are going to be people who are prosecuted for their behavior, for their actions, for engaging in this incursion. But there is still the matter of whether or not Donald Trump promoted this idea of storming the Capitol. Did he rile these people up? And I think if we're being honest here, he did. He significantly contributed to that. And while people are responsible for making their own decisions, he contributed to that. I do not believe that he will be held accountable. I do think, there are Democrats who are arguing we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We should be able to go down this road and deal with our first 100 days in a responsible manner. We should be able to do both. There are other Democrats saying that they don't believe that's possible. You've seen Tim Kaine come out and say he wants to explore the idea of censuring the former president. I personally just don't have much faith that Donald Trump is going to be held accountable for the role he played in what happened here. As a person who has a workspace that was about a block away from where one of those pipe bombs was planted, I take this very seriously, and I'm very sad for my country, because this just should have never happened. But here we are. So what are we going to do about it? And if the answer is nothing, then what example are we setting? What message are we sending? And we need to explore how we got here. And I don't think that we've had an honest enough dialogue about how we've gotten here.
Well, there you have it here, and we are glad you're okay, at least from the D.C. point of view, because, again, we've got the band back together. Look at us here.
Yeah.
We certainly do appreciate the time. Jessica DeLoach, Bill Vickery, guys, we got to do this again, because it's been too long.
Yeah.
We're not going to go this long again, for sure.
Just take care of yourself.
Yeah, I will. You too, both of you.
Look at that. They can play nice. Look at that. Fantastic. All right, guys, appreciate you again. Well, when we come back, we review week 3 of the legislative session. Some bills are already making their way to the governor's office. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
I love shoes. You find them in the store, they call you, but they hurt. The best ones hurt the worst. And you're walking around going, I don't want anyone to know that I'm not happy. You're stuck in the arch supports, and I felt so much better. I'd say Good Feet helped with all of my great shoes. They turned out to be something that actually works for me. My name is Ava, and that's my Good Feet story.
See for yourself with the free personalized arch support fitting at the Good Feet store.
The leaves are beautiful until they end up in your gutters. But with Guardian Gutter Protection, you'll never have to clean your gutters again. Let us keep you off the ladder and protect you and your home. Guardian Gutter Protection keeps out leaves, sticks, pine needles, even those annoying critters. We offer a 100% money-back, no-clog, hassle-free Guardian guarantee. Call today for our holiday special or check us out on the web at guardiangutterprotection.com.
Hi, I'm Missy Gibson. At John Gibson Auto Sales, we offer our customers the opportunity to buy almost any vehicle. We have over 900 cars, trucks, SUVs, motorcycles, ATVs, campers, performance trailers, and boats. We will finance your purchase in-house regardless of your credit history. You can actually make your purchase from home or on the go. Simply go online to johngibsonautosales.com and take a virtual tour of our inventory. We call it shopping made easy. See you soon at John Gibson Auto Sales, in person or online.
We've worked hard all of our lives, so when my wife and I retired, we wanted to spend our golden years with less responsibilities and more recreation and relaxation. That's why we chose Parkstone Place. Conveniently located in North Little Rock, Parkstone Place is home to independent seniors just like us. We have access to wonderful amenities like gourmet meals, housekeeping, transportation, exciting events, and more. We're now living our best lives in comfort and luxury. You can too. Join us at Parkstone Place.
Watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to Capitol View. The abortion debate continues in Congress as President Joe Biden reversed Trump-era rules today that limit access to the procedure. Democrats applaud President Biden's action, but Republicans want to pass permanent legislation to restrict abortion and the dollars that fund it. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports.
To undo the damage Trump has done.
President Joe Biden is reversing Trump-era actions on abortion.
Protecting women's health at home and abroad.
The new executive order launched a debate in Congress over abortion access and prompted a slew of proposed restrictions by Republicans.
I was appalled by this decision.
Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker focused on President Biden's reversal of the so-called Mexico City policy, a ban on U.S. government funding for foreign nonprofits that perform or promote abortions.
This decision showed a disregard to me for the consciences of millions of American taxpayers who are pro-life.
Republicans have argued the rule would reduce the number of abortions, but a Lancet Global Health study found the opposite effect, with the related decreased funding for contraceptives increasing unwanted pregnancies. Wicker wants the restricted aid policy written into law to eliminate the back and forth that results from which party sits in the White House.
Enshrining the Mexico City policy in statute.
But recognizing that would be a tough sell, Wicker says it may be easier to focus on making the Hyde Amendment permanent.
Of all the abortion-related bills that reach the Senate floor, this one should be the least controversial.
The Hyde Amendment prohibits federal dollars from funding abortions in the U.S. and has passed annually for more than 40 years.
It has stood the test of time.
But some Democrats are now saying it's time to end it. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
And here in Arkansas, a House bill that would require pregnant women be notified of medical, welfare, and private assistance programs available makes it through committee. Representative Jim Dotson's bill, Every Mom Matters Act, would require for women wanting an abortion to receive offers for resource access assistance. It would also require the Department of Health be able to connect women to services who ask for help on the hotline. The bill now heads to the full House. State Senator Linda Chesterfield wants more oversight of the state's medical marijuana industry. She introduced Senate Bill 226, and it would establish a legislative council that would, among other things, oversee all licensing and operations of dispensaries and cultivation facilities. Several bills are now making their way to the governor's desk. Senate Bill 74 and unanimous support in the House and Senate says it would expand broadband services across the state. It would allow for cities, counties to improvement districts to partner with established providers to expand broadband services for those who currently do not have service or those who are underserved. It will become effective as soon as the governor signs it. The Senate passed the Stand Your Ground bill, and it would allow for someone to use deadly force to defend themselves against an aggressor. The Senate approved Senate Bill 24 with a 27-7 vote. It now heads to the House Judiciary Committee and is scheduled to be heard on Tuesday. It is not known yet what the full impact of President Biden's cancellation of the Keystone XL project will mean to Arkansas, but officials are concerned it will hit the Port of Little Rock hard in the short term. The chief operating officer of Wellspun Pipe and Little Rock Port Authority director talked to a state Senate committee on Thursday. Many people would not associate the Keystone Pipeline project with Arkansas, but it played a massive role in the project.
However, a lot of the product that was made to go into the pipeline was done right here in Arkansas.
But now that President Joe Biden has nixed the project, it's left a lot of pipe on the ground and questions in the air, especially at the Port of Little Rock.
It will mean lost jobs. It will mean lost revenue. It will mean the Port of Little Rock moves fewer barges and fewer rail cars. It will mean that ancillary businesses like truck drivers and caterers and rental equipment companies will feel that impact.
And the ripple effect will grow wider beyond the Port of Little Rock.
They don't have the disposable income that they have, that they can go out to the restaurant now or go out and buy the new car or that new home that they're purchasing, and then that has an effect on the industries that support that.
Secretary of Commerce for Arkansas Mike Preston says this project has been politicized, citing environmental concerns. He says this project would have helped that issue.
The CO2 emissions for a pipeline are much, much lower than they would be if they'd have to rail or truck the product, which they're going to have to do now.
Port Executive Director Brian Day says even though this is a major blow to the port's flagship company, he's not concerned with their operations long term.
They're not going anywhere. They're committed to Little Rock. They're committed to Arkansas. They're committed to the United States, and we'll get through this. Again, it's just a little bit harder with that decision, but they're going to be fine.
With miles and miles of pipe stacked up with nowhere to go, officials ask if anyone is looking.
I know a guy who's got some pipe who we could certainly sell.
And officials are hoping this project could work its way through the court system and that the project can be completed with Arkansas manufactured pipe. And we are back to wrap it up after this. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
I just started having back problems, and it got to where it just hurt more and more every day. It got to the point to where I couldn't even hardly work or anything. I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand or anything. So, of course, I went to my doctor, and they sent me to a physical therapy. I tried to do that for a while. Didn't help at all. And then that's when I just finally, me and the wife have seen Dr. Curry's TV show several times, and I was like, I ought to just try that Dr. Curry. I mean, what's it going to hurt? We done tried everything else. So I gave him a call and went up to see him, and he really changed my life big time. He really did. I mean, I filed for disability and everything. I thought I was done. I feel good and strong. I pick up stuff. I feel great. I'm a new man. And my family sees it too. My wife said I've done more in the last 2 months around here than I've done in 2 years. And it's not bothering me at all. I do not hurt at all. It is all true. I've done everything I could, and nothing has helped until I seen Dr. Curry.
We're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And that will do it for today's show. We're back with an all-new Capitol View next week. Boom, there it is. Get the Capitol View podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. We'll see you next week.